Good evening, and thank you for joining us for a conversation on unpaid care work and its implications for women's economic empowerment. This is a series of conversations on gender equality in Sri Lanka, which UN Women is hosting together with the Embassy of France in Sri Lanka in the run-up to the Generation Equality Forum, which is taking place next week in Paris. The Paris Forum will convene governments, international organizations, civil society, young people, the private sector, and activists from across the world in order to make concrete, ambitious commitments towards achieving gender equality. The forum is convened by UN Women and co-hosted by the governments of Mexico and France. Today's conversation is focused on the forum's theme on economic justice and rights. Before we proceed, I would like to note a couple of logistical points. For those of you who are joining through the Zoom webinar, there is simultaneous interpretation available in Sinhala, Tamil, and Sign Language. And secondly, we may not be able to take questions during this conversation simply because the session is only for an hour. However, feel free to engage along with us and note your thoughts on the discussion and the issue at hand within the chat box. We can certainly look at providing some responses after the session, perhaps through a Facebook post. Without further ado, I would now like to welcome our two speakers for the day. We have Dr. Ramani Dulatilaka, who is an independent consultant. Dr. Ramani is focused on analyzing labor markets and subjecting well-being in Sri Lanka and the region, particularly China, Cambodia, India. And her current research interests are focused on the demand for women workers in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka's care economy, and access to land and women's empowerment in Sri Lanka. Secondly, we also have Naini Piris. She is the head of employee relations and senior HR business partner, supply chain for Unilever Sri Lanka. Naini has over 20 years of experience in human resource and employee relations, and she joined Unilever Sri Lanka as the first female industrial relations manager, and she's been with the organization for over 8 years. So thank you both for joining us today for this discussion. Very happy to have you both. Let me quickly give an introduction to the topic and the theme that we're focused on today. So our conversation is on unequal unpaid care work and its implications for women's economic empowerment. I think we are all quite aware that unpaid care work is something that is a global issue. We have 2 billion people working for 8 hours a day focused on care work every day without pay. And globally, UN Women reports that women bear the largest care burden since they spend more than 3 times as many hours on care work than men. And additionally, based on data from, I think, 64 countries, we have realized that if we calculate the value of care work using the minimum wage of these countries, it comes to about 9% of total global GDP, which amounts to 11 trillion US dollars, a stunning figure. And in Sri Lanka, this case is pretty similar. We have 87% of women and girls above the age of 10 who are involved in care work, compared to about 60% of men and boys. But what this statistic doesn't quite reveal is the true picture and the greater burden of the different types of care work that women undertake. And when you compare this fact with another fact, which is that 73% of women are actually classified as economically inactive in Sri Lanka, we realize that the problem is probably the tip of the iceberg. And we are also quite aware that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected women and girls, and in particularly hit hard on industries where women are predominantly in or focused in these industries. And so we see that care work is another reason as to why women's economic empowerment is even more greatly affected because of the impact of the pandemic. So before we start, I think it's important we kind of understand what is women's economic empowerment What is it? We all know that it is good for women to be economically active and independent. But why is this important to both of you, Ramani and Nani? Why is this important to you, broadly speaking, but also why is it important to you on a personal level?
Did you ask me, Prashani? I'm sorry, it wasn't very clear.
Yes, to both of you, actually. I'm posing the question as to why you think this is important, broadly speaking, but also at a personal level, why is this important to you? Maybe, Ramani, do you want to start and then we can proceed to Nani?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I think generally, from the point of view of economics, what is important about women's ability to earn their own income is that then they are independent and they are able to participate more in the economy, contribute more, and also have a certain amount of independence to make their choices. Of course, it doesn't mean that everybody should be forced to work. What we are talking about here is more in terms of choice. Women who want to work should have equal opportunities to do that. But of course, the problem we face is that most of the women who do work are pushed to work in jobs which aren't very nice. So it's distress which drives them to work. So I think the quality of employment is also important. Just having a job and earning income is really not enough.
No, absolutely. I agree with you, Dr. Ramani. Nani, do you have anything to add on why you think this is important?
Thank you, Prashani. So first and foremost, thank you so much for this opportunity to connect this discussion. So I fully echo and resonate with everything that Dr. Ramani said. I strongly believe as a woman that financial independence of a woman is the basic solid foundation of any family in the community. Because when the mother is financially independent, when the women in the family is financially independent, that brings a lot of freedom, lot of opportunities for everyone in the families. Yeah, so I think it's very important for women to be financially independent.
Thank you, Nayani. So I actually have a question for you, Dr. Ramani. Like you mentioned that, it's not just only about, having a job. It's about decent work, decent pay, and everything that's involved with that. But what's really interesting is you would expect that when economic growth, increases, when a country grows and has higher rates of economic growth, you would expect that more women would have access to more opportunities and their, labor force participation would actually increase. But this has not been the case in certain regions of the country. And it's also quite true for Sri Lanka, where you see that the female labor force participation rate has stagnated at 35% for decades. So my question is, what exactly are the factors that are driving women into the labor force? And what are the factors that are actually keeping them out of the labor force? And how exactly are different groups of women impacted by this?
The issue is very complex, and I think the easiest way to visualize it is in terms of kind of ring fencing. You have to imagine women caught in concentric circles of obstacles which they have to jump. Now, the first set, I would say, starts at the level of the individual. So age is a factor, ethnicity, because sometimes ethnicity connotes certain cultural values. Health is important. Then the individual's education level, the skills she has, whether she has the skills that are in demand in the market. So these are factors at the level of the individual. Then household factors also come into play, because as I said earlier, poverty drives a lot of women into the labor market. So household wherewithal is an important factor. Then household composition. How many children are there? How many elderly people are there who need care? How many males in the family who are working and earning money? Because generally, if they are earning money, women tend to hold back from participating in the labor market because an income is coming in anyway. Then you have factors at the level of the community. So here you have this all important thing, the social, social norms, notions about what women should and shouldn't do, what sort of jobs are appropriate for them. Then you have the business environment. What kind of production structures do you have? Are they favoring people with high levels of skills or low levels of skills? What do employers feel about hiring women? These are factors at the level of the community. And of course, other things like transport, that kind of infrastructure environment. Then you have the big macro environment. Is the economy growing? Are jobs growing? In a lot of places, you find the economy is growing, but there's jobless growth, really. So in these circumstances, it's hard for women to find employment. Then there is the issue of export orientation. Generally, if you are trading, particularly a small country like ours, if you are trading with the rest of the world, then you can capitalize on economies of scale. And generally, what the evidence shows is that export-oriented economies tend to generate a demand for women's labor. Now,
should or shouldn't do. I think that was something very interesting. So my question to Naini is, have you seen changes within your own family and your own communities and social circles when it comes to, women's economic empowerment and their engagement in the formal labor force? And have you also seen these kinds of similar changes happening within the supply chains, within the markets that you operated? So basically, within your own, I suppose, in your personal and then also in terms of your professional circles, how have you seen this?
Yes, indeed, Prashani. So actually, having worked as a human resource professional for 20 plus years, I have seen a gradual shift in the way society perceives women to be when it comes to taking up space in the workplace. We are now living in an era, as I believe, that where employers are keen to enable more diverse and inclusive culture. So that's creating more employment opportunities for women. So in this light, I have seen several job positions which were originally meant for men that are opening up to accommodate women from every background. So I can quote many such examples from Unilever Sri Lanka. However, I must emphasize that at Unilever, we provide job opportunities solely based on person's skills and abilities, and gender has no role to play. And that's actually how I was given this role of industrial relations manager as the first ever woman to take up the role in a male dominant unionized workforce at Unilever Sri Lanka 8 years ago. And also to say, would like to say that 2 years ago, we introduced our first ever female factory manager to manage overall operations at our Agra Patana city instant tea factory. And also we have introduced first ever general shift manager for our personal care manufacturing plant. And most recently, we were able to make history in diversity at Unilever Sri Lanka by introducing our first ever female shop floor employees at our Horana factory. So as an organization committed to support diversity and inclusion, our leadership has given their commitment to deliver on the diversity and inclusion agenda and to ensure that we achieve our aim to be more gender balanced. We have robust governance to measure progress. And in order to do so, we believe in having the right infrastructure, including establishing support services such as childcare facilities, health and well-being facilities, especially to uplift emotional well-being of the women that we would want to employ, and also having adequate policies and procedures in place would really support. So I actually see a huge shift in the recent past.
Thanks, Naini. I think that's also really interesting to hear, because you're mentioning that there is an increase, there is a change. We still see that the labor force participation rates have been quite stagnant at 35%. So my question is possibly to Ramani on, what exactly does labor in terms of the statistics? How do statistics view the term labor and labor force participation? And I would like to connect that with the whole issue of unpaid care work. What exactly do we mean by unpaid care work here? And what are the implications it has to increasing female labor force participation?
Well, yes, I do agree, and I have also been guilty of this. There is a term and you get stuck with it, and the term is labor force participation. So ergo, if you are working for pay, that means you are participating in the economy. If you're not, well, you're invisible and cannot be seen. Of course, with the feminist economists, they have been working a lot on this and raising awareness. And only now people are kind of alert to the fact that there's a lot of reproduction work going on that isn't paid and which must be factored in. But of course, it's not easy to factor this in. One is to put a price to it. You do need to put a price to it. And I would say it's much better to talk in terms of participation in the paid workforce, or participation in the unpaid workforce. If we make that distinction, it becomes a little clearer. But of course, the problem with this business of unpaid work is that you fail to recognize how the unpaid work is an input to paid work. The women who stay at home and make their husband's lunch for them to take to work, they are also providing a service. Of course, one way of looking at this is to say, okay, if you were to buy these services, then how much would you have to pay for it? And you can kind of impute a value. But that is also not satisfactory, because a lot of this unpaid care work depends on the quality of relationships. And what you can buy can't really be a substitute also. So there are a lot of problems in defining this issue of unpaid work. But then on the other hand, it also confounds our understanding of the choices women make. If you don't factor in the unpaid work that they do, and also the returns that they get. A lot of the unpaid care work and household work is done because of altruism. There's a lot of theory about that. But on the other hand, there are also economic returns. And for example, say children, a lot of people would look to children to look after them in their old age. So there are material benefits to this as well. Take marriage. There are material advantages to marriage. Particularly in societies like ours, where other institutions have not developed. So for example, you have the social capital that comes with marriage, the networks, the influence. Then you have a certain amount of security. Now this idea has been advanced by a certain school of economists But generally, it's been kind of un-PC to talk about the material advantages of marriage and talk about material. Oh, sorry, just one more. And just talk about marriage in very hard-headed material terms. But I do think that we need to take this into account, because the choices women make are based on all these things. And in fact, in countries like ours, where you can say societies are relatively traditional, even very educated parents want their educated daughters to get married. So why is that? So these are questions. I mean, it's not something special about our society. This used to be going on in Western society in the 1800s. But I think we need to be realistic about the things people do and give everything their proper value, or as much as we possibly can, if we are to understand why women make the choices they do.
Thanks, Ramani. I think that was a very important point about the fact that society and culture specifically, and how it constantly says, pretty much segregates women into certain industries and certain careers and doesn't allow much progression. Also, when you take into account issues like, well, I shouldn't call it an issue, but more of, I would suppose, relationships like marriage, for instance, factors that then continue to impede, because there's also research to show that marriage impedes women's labor force participation and economic empowerment, while actually boosting men's labor force participation and economic empowerment. So my question is, we have all of this, this societal understanding or cultural or traditional way of viewing unpaid care work as something that women are best placed to do. So Naini, I would like to check with you, how does the labor force and how does the impact of unpaid care work affect your employees, female employees in particular, when it comes to, their, it could be them working within the supply chains. It could be in them taking up leadership roles. It could also be in terms of how employers are looking at giving women leadership roles within the organization.
Thank you, Prashani, for asking that question. So I, of course, agree that there could be difficulties women would face as opposed to a man when taking up leadership roles. But having said that, particularly in a company like Unilever, I must say that we do only consider a person's skills and capabilities when assigning a role. And that's how I have been offered this particular role. Yeah. So gender or the burdens of unpaid care work never comes as a barrier for a woman who are skilled and competent and capable to take up any leadership positions within this organization. So having said that, my personal view is that women, us, cannot get away from the responsibilities expected of us at personal front and only focus on our careers. Like most importantly, if you are a mother or a sister or a daughter, you will need to play your part within your family and community. So in order for a woman who want to excel in a career, what we really need is a strong support system which will look after care work on behalf of us, which in turn would help women to break the glass ceiling. So it's important, as I believe, for employers to provide right support systems for women. Yeah. I hope I have answered your question well.
Yeah, you actually have, Naini. I think it would be really good to also understand how exactly has Unilever, for instance, supported in terms of, helping female employees in, having better, I suppose, work-life balance. And that's applicable for all employees, whether, male or female. So how has Unilever supported in terms of, getting employees to support better shared household responsibilities?
So Actually, I must say that, even before the COVID hit, we as an organization had been supporting employees extensively on work-life balance, and especially our female colleagues through various initiatives. So all our company policies are comprehensive and provide an overall sense of safety and security to all employees. As I said, it's not specifically for females, but for all our employees. Yeah. And for example, we have this domestic violence survivor policy to support employees who have faced domestic abuse or violence. And we also have fertility support policy and sexual harassment, like to support people who have have gone through sexual harassment. And also we have a universal code of business principles across all Unilever markets, which include principles on fair and equal treatment. So I must say that some of our key support services under this domestic abuse survivor policy includes providing temporary accommodation and legal services, and also certain monetary benefits to employees to come out of these negative situations, yeah, which would not impact their work negatively. And we have actually very comprehensive support systems for all of our employees to find their purpose, and also how to incorporate their purpose into work, so that they can bring their best selves to work every day. So also I'm pleased to say that despite the challenges that were thrown our way after COVID-19 hit the nation, we never held back when it came to supporting females. And because especially as we know, young parents and mothers were put in a very difficult situations when they had to look after their children, attend to all their household matters whilst attending to work when we sort of introduced work from home. I think I'm very proud to say Unilever Sri Lanka is one of the very first companies in the country that implemented a work from home policy for all employees. As soon as the COVID happened in March 2020, we immediately started work from home for all our employees. And we didn't stop there. Actually, we went into the extent of providing necessary trainings to line managers, to all the employees, also how to get accustomed to work from home. And so of course, our factories, our manufacturing facilities and field sales services continue to run when we shifted to work from home in March 2020 itself. And I must say, one of the first initiatives we implemented was creating awareness to employees on, as I said earlier, how to get accustomed to work from home whilst looking after and attending to all household matters in this new normal. For an example, if it's a young mother that who had to be with the kids to support online lessons in the morning half, we introduce an agile working system so that you can attend to your child's school in the morning, and you can conveniently work when you're free in the evening half and complete your work. So we empowered and we encouraged line managers also to accommodate such such colleagues as well. And we also introduced certain new policies to support our own colleagues in this front.
That's really interesting, Naini, because you would assume that, flexi time and flexi location were the pre-COVID forms of, being like in terms of, companies, that would be the kind of flexible working arrangements that they'll have for, parents who are interested in, better managing their work-life systems, I would say. But in a situation of COVID-19, was there anything further, were there any other steps that you took? Because these were the original forms that you would take to support work-life balance. But in a situation where only stuck at home in a lockdown situation, were there any other ways in which Unilever, looked at supporting employees?
Yes, of course. There are many, Prashani, I must say, for an example, we sent this, working chair to employees' residences, who the people opt out, because, we wanted to ensure that, our employees' health and well-being also would be looked after, because while working, and we need to ensure that people would look after their organs as well. So we sent the chairs to home. We delivered that individually, and also, like, we sent Unilever care packs, and also we extended a lot of additional health and medical facilities in terms of people who were tested positive for COVID, etc. also. And as I said earlier, because we did a lot of training also for line managers to to look after their own colleagues, and we encouraged all the line managers to connect with their teams at least once a week, have a coffee chat, half an hour, connect with your teams. Because see, what we felt was, now everyone is working from home, we don't meet like we did before COVID at office. So therefore, most of the people would move away, or would not feel comfortable to connect or work. So therefore, we encourage LMs to connect with their respective teams at least half an hour to 1 hour weekly basis. So to ensure and check on everyone is doing good. And we had we used to check everyone's health checks every day. We created a system, and we encouraged everyone to log into that system, which would take only 1 minute for a person to fill in a questionnaire and then submit. So that in that way, we had a central location who would feel having fever, not feeling well. So, that we can provide immediate and personal attention to that employees. Yeah,
that's actually really amazing, and I'm so glad to hear that there are initiatives like this being taken by private sector. Really interesting to hear, and I'm sure it will be very interesting for other workplaces also to consider some of what you have recommended as good practice. I actually want to come back to the point on unpaid care work, and maybe I would like to ask this from Ramani, like in terms of unpaid care work. We know that there are negative implications when it comes to unequal, unpaid care work, mostly falling onto women's shoulders. And how does this exactly play out within families and societies, particularly when it comes to women's engagement within decision-making levels, especially that?
Well, generally, to go back to the point we started with, if women are earning, they're doing a job, they have a better say, a stronger say in what goes on in the home and in decision making. But on the other hand, there are many things which impact on women's well-being. It's not just decision making. You can be employed, but the stress of coping with the demands of a job, in addition to all your other responsibilities, can be quite overwhelming. And actually, one of my graduate students, she did her doctoral thesis on the subjective well-being of women in and out of Sri Lanka's workforce. And what she found was that women who are working for pay are significantly less likely to be happy than women who are working full-time as homemakers. And that you can understand that, because they are juggling so many things and have so many demands made on them, and the whole, almost the entire burden of care has fallen on them. Also, we need to remember that we are an aging population now. So a lot of the elderly care burden also falls on fewer women. Earlier, families were bigger, there were more people to help, to pitch in, to keep an eye on an elderly person, to help her to the toilet, to bring her back. Now everything falls on just one person at the most. And then you think, okay, do you transfer this whole care business to the market? Hire people to do it? Who can afford? How many people can afford? How many people can afford things like diapers, adult diapers? And here we are a rapidly aging population. So I think it is true that getting employed, earning money will give you more say, and you may even be able to hire that carer. But it all depends on the kind of job you do and the skills and networks you have to get a good job. Most women are not in good jobs. If you look at labor force participation rates by education, if there are people with tertiary education, almost 80% are employed. They are working for money. The problem is with the secondary educated people. There's a vast group of them, maybe about 45% of the working age cohort, who are not so poor that they are driven to work to keep body and soul together, nor are they so educated to get the better jobs. So for them, doing the care work at home makes sense, makes economic sense. And maybe they make a kind of intertemporal investment. I will do this care work and running around after children now, and then my old age is looked after. Whereas the kind of job they will get, if they were to go to work, will not look after that. People with government pensions can't meet their medical bills. So I think we need to, what I'm trying to say is things are not so straightforward. There are a lot of things that come into play. And yeah, it's not a situation at all. Yeah, and likely to get much worse as the population ages.
Sorry, Ramani, I dropped out of the call for a little bit of time, so I think I missed the last bit. But I fully recognize your point about how demographics, it seems to me that demographics are actually going to be another stumbling block for women's economic empowerment, and what can be really done in terms of this. Like how can, what kind of policy shifts are required? Or are there any specific things that we need to pay attention to when it comes to this? Because if it's a demographic issue that we're going to see over the next 20, 30 years, what exactly are we looking at?
Well, in a way, what Nayani said provides a clue, and I think they are really on track. Women are living longer, and they are facing all sorts of old age problems, osteoporosis, diabetes, hypertension. So this issue of health, preventive health care, and simple things like looking after posture, alignment, making sure that you keep your feet good so your arches don't fall and wreck your hips and knees. These are all things which need to be looked after, and which people are not really that aware of. So I think the focus on health is very important, because you're going to get a lot more women living a lot longer and who are going to need a lot more care themselves. So that is an issue which we need to think about. In terms of employment itself, and also don't forget, if you're not earning a job now, and in a job now, then of course you're going to be dependent on somebody in your old age. So then what do you do to enhance women's earning capacity and opportunities? One thing is skills. In the study, Professor Sunil Chandrasiri and I did for UN Women on demand for female workers, what we found that there are serious skills deficits amongst middle-level occupations. Lack of English, problem-solving skills. There's a huge gap there, which needs to be addressed. Then there is also the issue of discrimination. I mean, Unilevers is of course at the high end of the scale. It's sort of the Brahmin or Brahmins, that level. Most firms are not like that. And in fact, what we found is that working from home has been quite hard for a lot of firms. Lack of infrastructure, inability to monitor, low productivity. These are all factors that they have had to struggle with. Apart from that, what we found was that when managers are male, those firms are less likely to be employing women. So there is a kind of inbuilt gender bias here, which needs to be addressed. Of course, there is also the issue of labor laws. To what extent do our current set of laws support work from home? Facilitate that. Leave alone work from home. Do they support part-time work, flexible work, working hours? They don't. And in a sense, all the statutory entitlements are based on a full day's work. Full-time work, not part-time work. But I would say in terms of policy, these would be fairly low-hanging fruit rather than, changing attitudes. But unfortunately, our policymakers have not been able to grasp these things and move on them for the last how many years? So there is also governance and capacity issues here. Not that people don't want to do, sometimes they want to do, they are well-intentioned, but they don't know how to do it or how to set about doing it or manage the whole implementation process. So these are a lot of obstacles which we are facing now, I think, and which will make it difficult for women. But then, of course, if some leaders, particularly private sector, in the private sector, not only if they fix their own issues like Unilever's, but help others, help the weaker firms, share their experience, their knowledge. That would be a great help. We need to help each other and pull each other out of this mess. I think we need to change our attitudes that way. Whereas I would say, unfortunately, the private sector also has been very dependent and looking to the government to do everything. If they are to do something, they will say, okay, what is the tax incentive you are offering? Is our government in a position to provide tax incentives with a budget deficit going at 14% of GDP? It's no point. Everybody has to pitch in and take a cut in profits so that in the long term we will be much better off.
Ramani, you mentioned something about the fact that there are these small, low-hanging fruits in terms of policy change that can be done. And then the fact that you mentioned that we have a high debt to GDP ratio that's ever rising. Is it not public knowledge, or is there not much awareness of the fact that women's economic empowerment will only add to the GDP of countries, that their inclusion within formal workplaces and providing access to decent work opportunities, all of it will actually support in the long run? Is that awareness something that is lacking, or what exactly could it be that's preventing us from making these small policy changes?
I think, increasing GDP, first, I don't know the extent to which policymakers are aware and understand. I think understanding of these issues is fairly basic at best. But apart from that, for women to be able to contribute towards economic growth, other conditions also have to be in place. Now, for example, in not just Sunil Chandrasiri's and my study, but in a study done by the World Bank, what you found was that the demand for women's employment is associated with industries where productivity is low. You see, so now if productivity is low, then how do you contribute to so much to GDP? So there we have this issue of certain sectors and occupations driving the demand for women's labor, and that demand is basically for unskilled workers. So what I'm trying to say is, if you have a situation where women have the skills, the jobs are there demanding those skills, then of course you contribute more. The value addition to GDP is more. Just because women become employed, it doesn't mean that GDP grows. It happens under a whole lot of other assumptions and conditions. So that is why the quality of employment is fundamental. And leave alone for women, our economy has not been able to generate decent jobs for men, despite so many years of economic liberalization, due to various factors. I mean, each time we sort of come out of our own mess, an external shock strikes and we are flung to our knees. There have been various factors like that, and also policy mistakes, the inability to foresee, the inability to figure out what sort of skills are needed, even the private sector. In our survey, we found relatively few private firms are aware of advanced technologies. They are not even aware of the need to introduce them. So we are talking about a kind of a spectrum of employment and employers here. So I would say, I mean, under ideal conditions, yes, women becoming employed in the paid economy will increase GDP and tax revenue and all that. Yeah, but certain other conditions need to be fulfilled.
Thanks, Ramani. And you also did touch upon something very interesting, which was, the fact that Unilever is probably at the high end of the spectrum when it comes to gender responsive, and gender sensitive policies, inclusive policies also particularly. And I wanted to check with you, Nayani. You mentioned that Unilever has recently recruited female blue-collar workers for the first time, and that too also within the COVID-19 pandemic. What was that experience like? What really motivated Unilever to do this, to introduce this at this particular point of time also? And what kind of challenges did you face when it comes to, implementing any new policy? I'm sure there's anyway challenges, but in particular, when it comes to this policy change, what kind of barriers or challenges did you face?
Yes, Prashani. So we were able to make history in diversity at Unilever Sri Lanka by introducing our very first female shop floor employees at our Horana site in from the month of May. And so I'm humbly proud to say that now a baby cologne manufacturing plant, a Pairs baby cologne manufacturing plant, is now 100% operated by females. So, so this was an ambition that we had for quite a long time. And we aim to we wanted to create diverse and inclusive culture across all our work levels. So to achieve this goal, as a pilot project, we introduced female casual employees in our personal care manufacturing plant 2 years ago, because we believed that we would do a test run for about a certain time to figure out, to understand the difficulties that would come, and to then sort of, to figure out how we would overcome those challenges before bringing in permanent female employees. So when we started doing these test runs in our manufacturing plant, the results that we saw was amazing. We witnessed very high productivity from female employees, which really, really motivated us to hire them on permanent cadre. So there were many challenges that we had to overcome during this process. So actually our manufacturing plants run on 24/7 basis. So the first few things we worked challenging the stereotypes and identify areas where we could deploy females, of course, according to the law of the land, and then setting up the right infrastructure facilities to provide them right accommodation, transportation, meals, having the right uniform, and having proper lounge, welfare facilities, etc. And not only that, actually, we went to the extent of allocating designated colleagues as mentors, and we set up a system to support these female employees to sort of provide them a career within Unilever. So when we recruit them, also we wanted to sort of we recruited girls with minimum qualifications on national vocational institutes. So we basically with that we were very sorry, can you hear
me? Okay. Yes, we can. Yeah, go ahead.
My line got stuck. Really sorry about it. So what I was talking is, so we set up a support system for these female shop floor employees to provide them higher education, so that we can provide them a career within Unilever, not just a job role. And we assign them individual mentors from our own management cadre to support them and individually guide them, understanding their own skills and capabilities to provide them a career. So I must say that we are very keen. We are very keen and will make every endeavor possible to provide these employees a career. And why am I like sort of insisting on and repeating this word is most of the companies that hire employees for a job, and actually at Unilever we are very passionate. We don't want to hire anyone for a job. We hire people for a particular portion, for a particular role, and then we want to develop them develop them in order for them to build on their skills and abilities and competencies. They can have a long-term career within the company, and not only within the company, even if they want to move out from Unilever, so that they will be employable elsewhere when they have the right set of skills. And so I must say this endeavor is just a stepping stone for us, paving the way for many more females to make a career at Unilever. And biggest takeaway as the head of ER who led this initiative for me is that to be bold enough to make ambitious targets, to find ways to achieve them. Because when as I said, earlier, when I was recruited as the first female industrial relations manager in this male dominant unionized workforce, there was not a single female shop floor employee here after the 830 male dominant workforce. So my ambitions was from the beginning was, that I should bring in diversity into this in this culture. And actually, luckily, I think Unilever is also very keen, and that's our priority, is to bring in diverse and inclusive culture. So with the company's support, that we were able to achieve this dream. And also, as a woman, I personally believe that it is our duty and responsibility to uplift the other women around us. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, we strong women support strong women, right? And I think it should be about lifting others up, but also we should also look at how men and boys can also support and, support women, and not just only like family members in terms of, for instance, just the sisters or mothers, but all women, instead of being selective in that kind of lens. But it's really interesting. Yes, go ahead, Naini. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say one quote which I have learned at Unilever, which I practice, which I think all women should consider. I believe that the best way to predict the future is to create it. I think as women, the best way to predict our future is that we should create it.
Agreed. Yeah. Nani, I wanted to come back to you about the point where you talked about, the first female shop floor workers. How did you go about actually changing that kind of, stereotypes or, ingrained kind of thinking that, male colleagues would have had? Like, how did you go about, changing that kind of, ingrained attitudes that they might have harbored?
So I must, as I said earlier, Prashant, I must say, because as Dr. Ramani said, I think Unilever has a very diverse and inclusive culture. So bringing a diverse and inclusive culture has been every leader's commitment. Yeah. So therefore, yes, of course, we had certain concerns because, as I said, our factories run on 24/7 basis. Therefore, how we could, the initial challenges that we had was, how are we going to deploy female employees in a night shift? Yeah. And then if you're deploying them in a night shift, that what are the other additional costs that we have to incur? And then what are the other support system that we will have to provide, etc. So, but then when we sort of, since we really, really wanted to do this, what we decided was like, we will bringing female employees as a team together, because just introducing one or two female employees in 800 plus male unionized work environment is not it's not right, and will not make not be really good. So what we did was, we patiently waited for some time. As I said from 2018, we did certain test run to figure out which lines, whether we could deploy female employees in manufacturing lines or packing lines, or certain, like, say cologne plant, etc. So then after figuring out the areas that we could deploy these females, so we did set up the infrastructure. We took some time. Actually, it was not that something which we achieved over a month. It was something we achieved over, I must say, for about good almost 5+ years. That so yes, it was required to change certain sort of mindset changes, etc., especially with unionized blue collared workforce. But I must say, at the end, everyone agreed and everyone is happy to welcome female employees at workplace. Yeah, Prashani, have I answered your question?
Yes, you have. Thanks so much for explaining that out in quite a lot of detail. So I think, we're almost coming to the end of our conversation, and I have one final question to pose to both of you. So Ramani and Nani, what next? Maybe in terms of, for Ramani, perhaps maybe you could talk about where are we heading to as a country when it comes to supporting women juggle both families and jobs and careers. But maybe, Nani, the question to you would be like, how would Unilever also continue to support women, juggle both jobs and families and careers, while also supporting their career growth?
Do I go first?
What?
Sure.
Yes,
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, where are we heading as a country? That's a good question. I think it is very difficult to fix the problem without having adequate female representation in parliament. I think that is where it's got to start. At the moment, it is if you have a loud voice, if you are a thug, if you are violent, then you have an advantage. So in this sort of situation, women don't have a comparative advantage. So I think it has to come with a change in the political culture first. And also, violence against women, discrimination against women, that that will go on so long as that kind of thing is tolerated in society at large. So we are talking about a very big problem here. And I think if we manage to increase female representation and give a voice to women, that will be a start. As for things relating to policy related to women's employment itself, then certainly reforming the labor legislation is a priority. I mean, it's a tall order. It's a long shopping list of what we have to do, and there are some encouraging signs. For example, I saw in the newspapers that with this 25% representation in local government, now the women are banding together regardless of party affiliation, if they are being pushed around by the males. Now that is a very good sign. I think if we can push that and work through women, and now we have a lot of women working in the public service as well, in management positions, in decision-making positions. If we can network and push things, I think things can begin to work well. But we also need to look after other burning issues, like the whole environmental issue. Environmental degradation, climate change, that is going to hit women harder than anybody else. It's the same with the pandemic. So those major issues need to be addressed, and we need leaders in all spheres who will think of the longer term and pull us through this current crisis. Really, maybe a new generation. Actually, I have pinned my hopes on the next generation. Yeah.
Thanks, Ramani. I mean, this ties in super well because the whole theme has been generation equality, which is the forum that's happening in Paris. So, and the fact that you talked about the interlinkages between so many of the issues that are happening across the world, and certainly relevant to Sri Lanka as well, it's all interconnected. I mean, yesterday's discussion was on women's leadership in governance and decision making. And we see how well that ties into today's conversation as well, and possibly the other conversations that are coming up in this series. So thanks for making that connection also. Maybe over to Nayani in terms of your thoughts on what Unilever would be doing to better support women in terms of juggling careers, jobs, family responsibilities, all of that.
Yeah, so Prashani, I believe so as Unilever, what is most important area for us is to build up on a supporting system for our women colleagues, such as providing guidance and support for parental care and creche facilities to look after young children, and also like employee assistant program to support whenever someone just want to pour your heart out to someone, who could lend a listening ear, and also provide the right advice, because as we know, we all women want to sort of, speak to someone, at most of the times, and then, but we will not be comfortable to speak to our own colleagues. So therefore, sort of, having a counseling program where everyone could speak confidentially and then get necessary advice, because we strongly believe it's important for us to provide and make available a service to get employees to provide right advice and guidance whenever necessary. And also the other key important thing that we Unilever doing is, to ensure that to have adequate and comprehensive policies to support our female colleagues. So if I'm to speak in terms of our show floor employees, we Unilever has sort of designed a very tailor-made capability development program according to their skills. Because as I said, because we believe providing them a career is a more sustainable solution for us and for them as well. Yeah. And so in the longer run, they also would be benefited, and we also will benefit from having them, because we don't want any of these female colleagues to continue working as blue collar employees throughout their life. We want them to sort of, build on their careers and then to join our management cadre one day. And also, if not, join a decent executive cadre work elsewhere. So to provide them right skills and guidance to be employable at a white collar cadre is a priority that we have taken on. And also we do provide advocacy in terms of health and well-being issues, mostly like, female specific medical support services. And I think I said this earlier as well. We do conduct Purpose and Thrive programs, which are like mostly in relation to emotional well-being for our female colleagues. We have done this actually for all our employees, not only for female colleagues, but we pay more attention to female colleagues, whether it's white collar or blue collar. And also we do conduct constant awareness on prevention of any form of harassment at work of life. And also we are right now in the process of implementing global working hours policy. And as we believe it is a fundamental human right to be able to have adequate time for yourself. And so in this connection, we will ensure that we do not deploy anyone beyond 12 working hours a day, and will never exceed 60 hours a week, work for a week, including paid overtime. And so that is something which we really, really want to comply with immediately. So in a summary, as an organization, what I would like to highlight is that, so as Unilever, equity, inclusion, and diversity is a commitment at the heart of Unilever Sri Lanka and Unilever Global. So that is why that, we have 60% of female representation at our management committee, at our board of directors level, and 40% of female representation at our leadership teams. And we do have leaders as role models, male leaders as role models to inclusive culture. And we have very strong focus on basics, which are having right, adequate, and comprehensive policies, procedures, and also, I must say, right practices in place. And I'm humbly proud to say that Unilever has achieved 50-50 gender balance in managerial roles globally. I know it's a challenge in the local context, but we have sort of, set a target for us that we will achieve Unilever Sri Lanka also to be gender balance 50-50 in the near future. So as a concluding remark, I would like to quote something Global Chief Human Resources Officer once said, and who is Lena Nair. She is a Unilever Global Chief Human Resource Officer. She said, "A thriving society is one where women have equal access to rights, skills, and opportunities. If half the populations are being held back, how are we all going to be able to move forward?" So therefore, I would like to encourage all of us to be #ActForEqual. Thank you, Prashani.
Thank you so much, Naomi and Ramani. We've come to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your expertise, the research that you have conducted and also Unilever has conducted in terms of how we come to, including more women into the workforce. It's great to hear. And I hope this conversation actually encourages the audience also to pick up on, some of the things that we've discussed and, discuss amongst families also in terms of how better to support women, and especially when it comes to shared household responsibilities, how we can look at, dividing these up more equally, even down to when it comes to the type of work that comes into the whole range of, care work that is involved. And I'm really glad that we could have this discussion. And I would encourage also the audience to tune in to the Generation Equality Forum, which is happening next week. Registration is currently ongoing until the 27th of June, and you can register at forum.generationequality.org for what would be, I hope, an insightful and productive forum that leads to an ambitious new feminist agenda. Thank you so much for tuning in today, everyone. And thank you so much once again, Dr. Ramani and Naini. Thank you.